Hello, and welcome to Broken the Stigma. This is my second presentation in a similar format to this. Unlike its predecessor, this presentation is not just based on my lived experience, also based on an experimental research study I conducted during 2021. I would like to thank my supervisor, Dr. Chanky Moon, from Leeds Beckett University, for all his support whilst undertaking this. It was an absolute pleasure, and I would recommend anyone working with him and the university in the future. So, all my professionalism goes out the window immediately. And I always give these two introductions because I always just hate telling people what I do. I'd much rather tell them who I am. So, my name is Andy Solkeld. I'm a geek. I'm a gamer. I love board games. My favourite ones are called Tomorrow and Fog of Love. I'm tattooed. I'm creative. I live with my little black cat Pika, who you can see in the picture. She's named after a Pokemon, not an eating disorder. She may even appear in this recording, so if you see her in the background, you'll know she's still here. I live with depression, anxiety, and have experienced suicidal ideation. I'm medicated. I speak to a therapist regularly. I'm a patient of IAPT. I'm a car crash of a human being, and I've accepted all of that and what comes with it. But I'm also Andrew Solkeld. I'm a Big Four chartered accountant and corporate financier. I'm a co-owner and director of a small tech business in Leeds. I'm a published author of a book titled Life is a Four-Letter Word, a mental health survival guide for professionals, which was regarded by CEO Today as the #1 book for understanding employee mental health. I've spoken at numerous global organizations sharing my lived experiences of mental illness. And importantly now, and why I'm doing this, is I am also a chartered psychologist, or I will be as soon as I bother filing the paperwork. And I'm one of only a handful of people in the UK who has a dual chartership as a chartered accountant, chartered psychologist. So I guess you could call me psyccountant. And all of that sounds mighty impressive, doesn't it? But it's been a long journey. So a bit of a too long didn't read version of what got me here and recording this today is COVID happened. And like for many people, COVID-19 affected a lot of my life, and it took a lot away from me, much as it did many others. Now, many people had it much worse than me. Many people lost their lives. I will never say that I am not privileged and lucky to be here. I am privileged and I am lucky to have survived this, and I'm forever thankful for that. And it motivated me when I was sat in the middle of the news or listening to the news, hearing people struggling with their mental health, with the isolation and loneliness that comes of being of living in lockdown in a global pandemic. And I wanted to do more. In a lot of my work, at the start of my book, in my presentations, I always caveated myself. I always said, I am not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist, psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, psychopath. Probably didn't need the last one. But I wasn't one. And if someone were to come with me for a question that I didn't feel was appropriate for me to answer, then I would always refer them to a professional. And I sat there when my business had closed, when my book launch wasn't what I had hoped for, when I had lost my house, my home, and the only things I had left were my friends, my family, and Pika. I sat there and knowing I wanted to do more for these people. And I said, but what if I was? What if I could do more? What if I was a psychologist or something like that? So I begged and I borrowed and I scraped together everything I could to do a conversion master's at Leeds Beckett University to try to help people in a way that I couldn't before. I wanted to learn more about how people interact with and within business. so that I could potentially do more to help them. Now, I don't know what this means. I don't know where it's all going, but I care about these people and I care about giving more back. And this is one of the ways I'm doing that, by sharing all of this as freely as I can. But I want to include this slide. I've included it in all my presentations, I believe, because it's something that keeps me honest. It's something that keeps me honest with myself and with everyone out there. I do not have confidence in myself or what I do. I seek external approval to feel valued in both my work and my life. I give things away as freely as I can because it provides fewer points of rejection. And I want people to see what I do in the hope, and it is blind hope, that someday someone will come to me and say, we want you to work with us, rather than me to have to go out and fight for every small and fleeting victory. I may appear confident in talking about this presentation. I may appear outgoing. I may even appear like I'm enjoying myself. But underneath it all, I'm none of those. And the reason I do this and the reason I keep this slide present is because there are so many people out there that feel exactly the same way. Many of them have reached out to me and they believe in me and what I do. So I do this for them and so that they can have representation and so that people can see that actually it's okay to struggle with what life is like. A few disclaimers before we begin. Firstly, this is a presentation based on my research project, but it's designed to be accessible. And as such, some of the technical detail might be left out. Some of the nuanced wording may be slightly different. The full research report that my dissertation was based on is available on my website, completely free of access, and anyone can read it. It has all the references, all the kind of analytics, the calculations, everything is available. Everyone can read that freely if you would like to. But this is an accessible version of that. Secondly, this is a sensitive topic, and if you feel for any reason uncomfortable, or feel free to step outside, feel free to turn off the video, take a breather, and come back when you're comfortable, or just head off and carry on with your day. There may be some bad language. I'm sorry. I just like swearing. Supposedly it means you're more honest because you don't verbally filter your language. But either way, just a disclaimer so it doesn't catch you off guard. There will be time for questions at the end. Obviously, it's hard in a video recording like this, but take notes, do what you like. This is designed for entertainment and accessibility. And this is why it matters. Everything I've done is about supporting professional services. And professional services, so accountants, lawyers, people like that, a very demanding workplace. We constantly work to an exceptional quality, often far exceeding expectations within some incredibly tight timeframes. We often work long hours and go well and above and beyond what is required or expected of us. It's a very challenging work environment, but it's so rewarding. So here's a couple of facts that come from various charities that support professionals. So the Chartered Accountants Benevolent Association, 32% of accountants reported they feel stressed in a day-to-day of their life, in day-to-day life. Further 17% have been forced to take time off due to stress. So almost 50% of accountants experience stress daily, with some of them needing to take time off. Workplace stress had caused 42% of respondents in the survey they did to consider resigning from their post, while almost 14% had actually resigned and handed their notice in because of workplace stress. So stress is part of the work environment. And Lawcare, a charitable organisation focused towards lawyers, published similar. 23% of all communications with the charity relate to stress. Further 25% relate to depression and anxiety, two common mental illnesses. So again, almost 50% of communication regarding stress and mental ill health. The stress is present in our businesses, our business cultures. But we already kind of knew this problem. And this is where my interest in mental health comes in. Stigma. The problem is that stress has been shown to have a prognostic effect towards mental illness. There is a potential cause linked there. And that often a diagnosis of a common mental illness like anxiety and depression, often stress is present. So, if stress is present in the workplace, then the mental health of the teams is incredibly important, and the businesses should be doing something to support them. Employers owe a duty of care to their employees with regards to their mental health if they are exposing them to stress. And the reason stress is a problem is because our physiological stress response really hasn't changed that much over the years and doesn't really differentiate between the type of stress we're experiencing. So the stress response is often connected to the 4 F's: fight, flight, fright, and fuck. There, I said it. Your body prepares itself, combat threat, flee from a threat, cower from a threat, or, well, you know. And when your body experiences this, it kind of asks itself 2 questions. And no, these aren't necessarily connected to reality. These are all about perception. So firstly, do you perceive what you're experiencing as a threat? No? Fine, carry on. Yes? Let's check the second question. Do you perceive you can cope with the threat? No? Stress response. Yes? Carry on. So because this is based on perception, it can change based on your circumstances, what you've experienced, what you are experiencing, etc. And the stress response that follows is largely the same. Now, most stress is designed to be acute. It's meant to be short-lasting. Your body kind of psychs itself up, prepares for stress, deals with stress, then recovers from the heightened state it's in. And that's good. Problem comes when stress is constant, persistent, chronic, because your body doesn't easily recover from that state. And it can lead to incorrectly identifying stress and have much greater implications beyond just that moment. And there's numerous things that have connected kind of chronic stress to weakened immune system, lack of concentration, lack of sleep, ability to heal wounds, and so on. And the list goes on. Chronic stress is bad. Now, I'm interested in this because of the connection to mental health and my experiences. But the impact is far-reaching and should be treated very seriously by all employers and in all contexts. Now, I came into my research with a hunch. I came into it with the idea of stigma because I've spent 3 years breaking the stigma. And from speaking to organizations, there always appeared to be this sort of disconnect between the leadership teams and the people involved. The leadership teams were very kind of supportive. They were always like, we will do whatever we can to support our people. We will put them in contact with counseling. We will help them seek the accommodations that they need because our people matter. But then at the same time, I had similar conversations with the people and the employees. They were like, they just don't get it, don't understand. And there was just this weird break between them. There was still fear of speaking up, regardless of what the leadership teams were saying. Even when I discussed the results of this research with people, which we'll come on to later, the first response is always like, yeah, but that's what just people say. It's not how it really is it? So perception was worse than reality. So I came into this thinking, okay, well, there's probably this stigma, and then there's this thing called perceived stigma over here. And I'll probably try to explore both of these things to see if there's a difference, and so on. But what I actually found out was there's so much more than this. And it's like, obviously, I'm considering this from mental ill health stigma, but it applies to anything because stigma is connected to attitudes towards attributes of people. So, and there's two primary categories and a shared category. The primary categories of that of the stigmatizer and the stigmatized. So the stigmatizer, these are the primary mechanisms of stigma. So this is sort of stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination. And these are affectionately referred to as the Holy Trinity of stigma. And these broadly relate to how we think, how we feel, and how we act towards people displaying an attribute. So in my case, how we think, feel, and act towards people displaying mental ill health. Next, we have the perspective of the stigmatized. So this is the person with mental ill health. And there are three components of this. So this is experienced stigma. So what have they experienced through the mechanisms? Anticipated stigma, which is what they anticipate to experience through the mechanism. But worryingly, internalized stigma. So this is stigma they then perpetuate about themselves. So this is, and I can say this as a personal experience, this is where I would say to myself, I will never be able to work a this sort of job because of living with depression and anxiety. Like, I will never be able to do that because of what it does to me, and so on. But then there's this shared component, which both stigmatizer and stigmatized contribute to. It's called perceived stigma. And this is connected to societal, cultural, and group beliefs. And the reason stigma is so important, the reason it's important towards mental ill health particularly, is because it's one of the largest barriers to people seeking help. So people often try to hide what they're struggling with because of fear and shame of perceived negativity towards themselves. So things like someone saying, I can't tell someone that I'm stressed or that I'm anxious about this because they'll see me, then they'll only ever see me as this, and I'll never get promoted, I'll never be given these opportunities, I won't be treated evenly. Or I won't be able to get the appropriate accommodations I want. And in fact, stigma is such a problem that many people actually report that the associated stigma of mental illness is worse than living with the mental illness itself. So if stigma is present, people who could benefit from the improving quality of therapies, treatments, and support either choose not to start it or don't continue it, which brings us full circle back to why this is so important to professional services. As an accountant, a lawyer, but just as anyone who works in a stressful environment, our mental health is at risk because we are under potentially chronic stress. If stigma towards mental health is present within our organizations, then it may prevent us from seeking appropriate help that could provide us with better life outcomes. So this matters because life matters. So I dedicated a year of my life to capstone the 3 years previous breaking the stigma. And I wanted to answer a very simple question. Had we broken the stigma? So I'm now going to talk a little about what my study was, how it worked, and what I hope to accomplish. So following the usual disclosures, my experiment asked people to read a vignette of an employee as presented on the screen now. And then after reading this, they're asked some questions about their attitudes towards the individual and what they perceive other people's attitudes towards be. There was no way for me to trace back to the individual or their organizations, completely anonymous, confidential. The only demographic information included was age, sex, length of service, all of which turned out to have no correlation to the results, so we don't need to focus on that at present. The vignette was incredibly important to this study because I wanted to make sure it connected it back to reality, so what it was like in work. And I wanted to make it very clear in the last sentence that the quality and delivery of their work remains unchanged. Because in many instances, people struggling with mental ill health or anything like that, the quality of their work does remain unchanged. But people can often perceive things negatively. So I wanted to make that clear, and I wanted to make it gender neutral as I could, so that the readers put context around it themselves. And what this allowed me to do was to see if any changes in the responses to the questions that were asked were connected to a diagnosis. Now you will see in the vignette there is no mention of a diagnosis, and that's because that was the experiment. So when people signed up and got through all the sign-up process, they were randomly assigned to one of 3 experimental conditions. One where Sam confesses a recent diagnosis of anxiety, one where Sam confesses a recent diagnosis of diabetes, and the one you read, which was a kind of pure control. I wanted to see if discussing a diagnosis of a common mental illness resulted in different responses. And this kind of would allow us to identify a causal relationship. So does a diagnosis of a mental illness cause people to be more stigmatic towards you? And this is very similar to how A/B testing works in online marketing and things like that, to identify which is the most successful advert. If you have ever browsed the internet and believed your version of the website is the only version of the website that's out there, I'm sorry to break it to you, they change things depending on numerous things, like most obviously targeted ads based on your cookies and stuff like that. The questions people were asked following reading the vignette were based on a questionnaire titled the Managerial Stigma Towards Employee Depression Scale. And this measures the 3 components of stigma that I mentioned previously: stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination. And all I did was I adjusted these questions to refer to Sam, and duplicated and changed them to consider perceived stigma by having them talk about people within my organization. And this allowed me to look at the tri-component model of stigma, both present and perceived. But here's the part I hadn't appreciated. I'd done a load of work. I'd tried to make this as applicable to organizations as I could. I wanted it to have real world impact. So much that happens in the academic space never truly gets implemented by organizations. So I wanted to make sure it was applicable. But one of the things with experiments like this is for you to be able to generalize the results to the population, to the kind of general population, in this case, all professional service workers in the UK, you need to achieve a certain threshold of participants to get the appropriate statistical power. And for me, in this experiment, I needed about 160 people to take part, and I got 59. Now, clearly, this was happening still during periods of lockdown. I wasn't able to do various face-to-face organizations. I was too busy to be able to do online sessions. And there's also there is a very important code of ethics that you need to follow whilst you're a psychologist, that involves kind of, you shouldn't really follow up after communicating with people, because then it could be seen as coercion, which can invalidate your results, etc., etc. So I ended up with 59 people. And it's important that this is stated now, because what this means is you have to take all these findings with a pinch of salt, because it doesn't have the pure statistical power to be applicable. But it does give us an idea and an indication, but further work is required for this to be truly generalizable to the population. Now here, an actual slide. I am truly maturing as a presenter. And these were the results. And they are largely positive. So we'll just go over them briefly. Firstly, there is no significant difference between the diagnosis of a physical health condition, a mental health condition, or no mention of a diagnosis. This is true for both present and perceived stigma. That's pretty good. Discussing a diagnosis with a colleague, a diagnosis of any sort with a colleague, doesn't necessarily change how people think, feel, or act towards you. That's good. That's really good. Next, in both present and perceived stigma, primary subcomponent driving what stigma is present across all the diagnosis is affective prejudice. So this is how people emotionally feel towards the individual with the diagnosis. Now, this bit, it's small for now, but it's incredibly important when it comes to real world implications later on. And next, in all instances, perceived stigma. So when responding to these questions, they more agreed with statements about people within their organization rather than themselves. Perceived stigma is significantly greater than present stigma. So yes, everyone else is the asshole. Now, there's several things that could be happening here. Firstly, this could be a self-serving bias where people prefer not to say bad things about themselves and want to kind of look positively. Could also be negativity bias where they view the rest of the world negatively compared to themselves. There could be some ordering effects where I ask people to answer questions about themselves first and then the organization afterwards. There's lots of things that could be happening here. And finally, and this is the most important bit, and I want, as I said, take this with a pinch of salt because of all the kind of statistical power and all of that. When you consider the results of all these studies compared to the scale and the mean, so on average, people disagree with statements of stigma being present within their organization, both individually and in their perception of. People disagree, so mostly disagree, that stigma is present. And that's good. Did we do it? Did we break the stigma? And as I said, this is where the statistics and sample size really unravel it a bit. We can't know for certain. It gives us a good indication. This is something I would love to run again, but be partnered with organizations to actually do this within their population. Sit within a big firm or small firm and just be like, right, let's do this. Let's see what the results are like for your company. But for a moment, let's step back and let's take a pause and just be like, this is a really positive indication. All the work we've done, myself, organizations, everyone else out there that has tried to promote positive, mentally healthy cultures, it is having an effect. Now, we can't say how much of an effect, we can't do all of that. Usual caveats. But stigma is reducing. Great. So now we're going to cover the kind of real world impacts of a lot of these things and what this actually means going forward, how we can change things. And we're going to start with something that I affectionately refer to as the yoga paradox. And this is very much where I like to describe us as living in an episode of House, where we treat symptoms rather than causes. We all know stress exists within our business. That's a given. It's part and parcel of it. And stress and stressful environments are often due to a lack of resources in some form or another. And ultimately, the resources we have, when you boil it all down, are energy and time. And it's all about how you spend energy through time. We use money as a proxy for time and energy. And when it's a proxy for time, it's either for the time they spend doing something or the time they spent previously experiencing something to allow them to do something. And ultimately, if you want to lower stress, provide people with more resource. So this is more energy or more time. So this could be recruiting more people or paying people more or bringing in more energy to provide more time to allow people to do things in. What happens though is that we treat the symptoms, and the stress response that we experience can be relieved through a number of ways, including exercise and things like yoga. And I will never tell people not to do yoga. I'll never tell people not to do exercise. I desperately need to do more exercise myself. So please keep doing exercise. But here's the yoga paradox. I'm struggling with stress. I know that's because I'm low on resources. I'm overworked, underpaid, all the rest. There's not enough time in the world, blah, blah, blah. I'm nervous of raising my struggles because of stigma, negative attribution. I worry people will see it as an inability to cope, and I will be tarnished with that for life. I then get told that to address my concerns about stress that I'm worried with, that I should do yoga, which takes more time out of a day that is already time pressured. So it takes more resources than I'm already resource light on. And the response is, well, they don't really understand the problem. They're not addressing the real problem, they're addressing the symptoms. And then you walk full circle in a paradox, in kind of a causality loop that says, okay, well, now I'm even less likely to talk about it, which means they're less likely to recruit or change the system, and thus the cycle perpetuates. And I believe this is what partly drives that communication breakdown that I talked about at the beginning, and what leads to this sort of perceived stigma, where there's a disconnect and the root cause isn't really addressed by the solutions provided. Now, there are countless things that alleviate stress, and there are so many things that can be done. And doing yoga is important, or going running, doing anything like that is important. But in the context of work, if you are working a 90-hour week, then that should probably be done by 2 people working a 45-hour week, or maybe 3 people working a 30-hour week. But if you do not raise that as a genuine concern, if you think, oh well, I'm just expected to work a 60-hour week or 90-hour week or whatever, or this is just part of it and it is causing you problems, nothing can change if you don't say anything. I would urge anyone that is struggling with anything like this to just talk about it. To just say, hey, look, I'm under-resourced and this is hard. There's nothing wrong with saying this is hard, because that's life. Life is hard. And then we come to this. Now, the research showed that affective prejudice or stigma driven by emotion was what was significantly greater than stereotyping and discrimination. So the cognitive and the behavioral components of stigma. And this is where we get to real world implications. So over the past decade, there has been so much education provided to organizations and individuals about mental ill health, well-being, cognitive biases, supporting people, destigmatizing, everything like that. This is a common trend across all professional service firms I know, across most industries. There'll almost certainly be a mental health first aider program within most businesses now. These are all really good. Problem is that education, which is what a lot of these are based on, is only really addresses the stereotyping component of stigma, or is best at addressing the stereotyping stigma, which makes sense. We're educated, which changes the way we think, which stops perpetuating stereotypes and so on. And it also makes sense from the data. It's why the stereotyping component is lower, or why the cognitive component is lower than the affective component. And again, this is good. What we have done works. But one of the problems that comes with this is a lot of the support that businesses provide, and this is mirrored by our healthcare system. So again, nothing is wrong with this, but a lot of them require the individual who is struggling to take the lead and to make decisions for themselves and then progress through whatever solution they are offered or that they find. There are helplines available on our website. There are drop-in sessions that you can come and speak to someone about this. There are educational resources that can be accessed from anywhere on the internet. There are mental health first aiders within our organisation that people can reach out to at any point that they're struggling. And all of these are great. They all ask the person who is struggling to take action. They are all help-seeking behaviours. And you know what the last thing someone wants to do when they're struggling, and particularly when they don't necessarily understand it that well, they don't want to take action because they're scared. And when you feel fear and shame towards what you're struggling with, you'll have a look around, but then you'll back away because you're scared. Now, that could be, and again, this is what comes down to stigma. So all these things that are incredibly important and do need to be there, you need these to be a necessary part of the workplace ecosystem that can all, so that people can access the information and support at all times. They absolutely need to be present. But to help those people and to stop and to take the onus off them, there are better ways to do that. And that is through what is often referred to as contact interventions. And that is meeting or experiencing life with people who have experienced mental illness or who live with mental illness. Now, remember, I am someone with a mental illness. This presentation is effectively a contact intervention. It's also an education intervention, but you are seeing what a person with a mental illness can be like. That helps lower effective stigma. Research has shown that contact like this today results in people less likely to perpetuate stigma, less likely to be prejudicial, less likely to perpetuate stereotypes. Contact often results in people endorsing and perpetuating positive beliefs around mental ill health. It's also been shown to be more effective overall than education at reducing effective stigma. Contact doesn't need to be with someone external to an organisation like myself. It can be with people within the organisation. This is where it gets very interesting, or at least from my point of view, because this all builds upon an idea of kind of our social identity. We as human beings, as individuals, often define ourselves through our social groups and what groups we are part of. And this is one of the reasons I am well accepted by the professional services community, because I myself am from professional services. I am an accountant, after all. I have lived the life of an accountant, so I have experience in that. And if someone who wasn't an accountant was trying to tell you what being an accountant was like and what these experiences are, you may not listen to them as much. You may be educated, but you may not necessarily listen to them. But the powerful thing about being an internal member of an organization, sharing your experience, is that it starts to change cultural norms, and it starts to create those attributes. So mental illness or supporting people with mental health, it starts creating those as part of the in-group identity. And that starts changing the cultural norms and makes them acceptable. So then in future, should someone experience similar, should they start to experience mental ill health or something they are uncertain with, it is suddenly more acceptable to discuss it, and more acceptable to have the conversations around it. So we need to normalize these conversations. We need to normalize these experiences within our people. We need to allow people to experience this at their own time within the group, not seeking outside the group. People who are suffering need to be able to say that they are suffering or that they are struggling and that their health is bad and that they need the time to recover. And one thing, and I say this honestly, one thing I wish more people would do is drop the mental from mental health and just talk about health, because it is just health. If becoming a psychologist has taught me anything, it's that our mind and our body are very firmly intertwined, interconnected, and inseparable. So believing your mental health is different from your physical health just doesn't work. There is only health, and everyone deserves to be healthy. And we need to treat people one and the same, and to have people be able to talk about their health within our organizations. So that's the end of much of my presentation. So where does this all leave me? Well, over the years of me sharing my story, giving various talks, even writing a book, countless people have spoken to me about working together, doing something together, or have just wanted to sit and talk to me, so that they can share and experience what they're feeling. And I am my own worst enemy in this. I am not a great salesman of me. I really struggle with self-promotion, and I never know what's right or what's wrong. So understand that what I'm about to say is incredibly tough for me to do, but it's something that I feel is necessary. And that is, for the first time, I am asking for help. I lost a lot. I do not have any significant income streams anymore. And I want to turn what I have done over the years into something that can continue to help people. And one of the things I'd like to do is I'd like to further this research through perhaps undertaking a PhD. I want to lead the conversation of how, and it doesn't necessarily need to be limited to professional services employees, that's just my background, but I want to find out how our people within our businesses can be their absolute best and deliver the best. The world has changed in the light of COVID-19, and things look very differently now. And I want to see how we can build our best businesses, and how culture has changed and what matters to people. And is there a better way of working? And doing a PhD requires a lot of funding. And this is me asking to see whether any firms are interested in sponsorship, or whether they would like to be a part of this. The hardest part I had in this research project was recruiting participants, and the fear of my findings not being heard. And working with an organization or a group of organizations could allow me to continue to do this, but actually shape it into something professional services or businesses in general want, because this can change how things work, and for our people for the better. I don't know what the exact direction is, but this is something I'm passionate about, and I would welcome a discussion if this is something you or your organization would like to support. Now, secondly, direct sponsorship can always be tricky. So I'm going to be offering a kind of a package of Breaking the Stigma and this presentation, Broken the Stigma, to be presented to staff in offices or online or anything like that. And any money I raise through doing that can go towards the fees required for a PhD. And this can be combined with purchasing copies of my book, anything like that. I will probably also produce some other talks that can go along this around important topics. So probably a deep dive on stress, maybe a deep dive on depression, anxiety, things like that, to just give people, like, I know I talk about contact, but still education is important, and this is things I can educate on now. Again, these can be shaped by your organizations. If there's something you would like, there's something that could be tailored to you and your people, I may be able to help. So please do not be afraid to reach out. Finally, many people have asked for it, and I do want to provide a dedicated one-to-one support offering for individuals, potentially through businesses. I don't know what the term is. There's so many protected terms nowadays, like I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist, like whether it's coach or mentor, I don't know, but it's about supporting people and allow them to de-stress in a not necessarily a physical way, because a lot of de-stressing requires physical. I'm much better at doing this with conversation and focusing on more motivational de-stressing. Now, maybe it's work stress, maybe it's home stress, maybe there's something else, and you just need to talk to someone that's not connected. And I want to allow people to have this, potentially in their workplaces, so that they can focus on their work and they can get things done, and then they can feel motivated, get it done. And if I can do this and it allows everyone in an organization to be 5% more effective, 10% more effective, and that's a huge benefit to organizations. And that's something I believe I can offer. Now, it's a sort of occupational psychological support. And everyone I mention this to, whenever I talk about it, they go, oh my God, it's just like that person in Billions. And so, yes, I guess it's that. I just want people to be their best selves within the context of work and then beyond. As I said, these are things I'm really passionate about, and I'm at a stage where I need help. I genuinely need help, and I need help from people who are listening to this and the organizations that I try to support. As I said at the start, I'm not a great salesman of myself. I lack confidence. So if you are interested in discussing any of this with me, my inbox is always open. And finally, I just want to leave you with the 3 points that I always leave people with, because they're so important to me. Firstly, accept yourself, flaws, your successes, all of it, and accept what the world is and your part within it. I have song lyrics tattooed on my arm that read, "It's not what I wanted, it's not what I planned, not where I thought I'd be, it's just where I am." And I hope everyone can find that level of acceptance within themselves and the world. It's hard. I still struggle with it, but it's something to always work towards. Secondly, didn't expect that. Secondly, find your happiness, embrace it, but find it in the present. Too much of life is reminiscing over the past or dreaming of the future. Too much of it is wishing for tomorrow. You lose the time of loving and living what is now. And if you can find that happiness in the present, you will enjoy things far much more. And finally, just don't be a dick. Please, just don't be a dick. Thank you. Now, this is the time I would normally ask people for questions, and there would surely be many, but most people are shy, and it often starts with a nervous thank you, maybe with a subtle question, and then the floodgates of acceptability open up. Clearly, that's not easily doable via this recording, but if you do have questions about my research, this talk, or anything else, whether it's working together or just a thank you, my website is andysolkel.com, and you can contact me through there about anything. Thank you.